Well, let's start then. When I prepared to introduce you, I realized that there are way too many achievements to get into in an introduction. Um, the list of your publications alone on homeopathicheritage.com is 6 pages long.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought maybe we'll talk a little bit about your previous books before we get into this new book. And also, I wanted to ask you to talk about your first experiences in Colorado, because this was really close to my heart. You
Mhm.
helped me then, not connected to homeopathy or anything, and you didn't even know me. We never met. So I was a poor immigrant. I had no money, total stress, no health insurance, and I got sick. So people said, hey, we have this great institution. It's called the Boulder Free Clinic. So I went there, and what a relief. They did help me. I can't remember what it was, but they helped me. And then I just read a couple of days ago that you founded the Boulder Free Clinic.
Well, in a way I did, and in a way I didn't. I mean, even before the Boulder Free Clinic, I had a little free clinic in the SDS office downtown.
The SDS, the Students, the Social Student.
Students for Democratic Society.
Yeah.
My friend founded the chapter, and I was doing draft resistance at that time. And so, but anyway, I had a little free clinic in that office, and people, during the Vietnam War, people were calling me up to break their legs so they didn't have to go to the army and stuff like that.
Wow.
And it was wild. Um, and Bob McFarland was my friend, and so when he was the one who really started the Boulder Free Clinic. And I sort of consulted with him about that, but I wasn't really on the staff there of the one that he founded. I had my own a few years before that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but he
Yeah.
he was a good guy.
Yes, he
Um,
was a wonderful doctor. He helped a lot of people. And
yeah,
that's, the impression I got from him and from you as well, that you were both very compassionate and had a social responsibility.
yeah.
It was a different doctoring than what we see now
Yeah.
at times.
Well,
And,
I
and
go ahead.
I also in Boulder, I went to, the early days, people lived in the mountains and all over and pretty rustic, and there were always some kind of parties and dinners. And and I heard your name. I didn't get there until 79, but I did hear your name about uh, being a companion or a support to the midwives. And then
Mhm.
when my daughter had a baby, a home birth, those two midwives told me about you.
Mm.
And because I think the midwives weren't legal at the time, right?
I don't, I think that's true. I don't remember the specifics of that, but yes, it was, home birth was not, there was no formal presence for home birth in that area. And so you just did it and took your chances. And yeah, and I did know some midwives, but I wish I could remember their names. I can't. But
I
but
would find them. I'll look. I
but
may
Boulder
find them.
Boulder was really where I started my own particular brand of practicing, and it revolved around, eventually it was home birth that really changed my life as a doctor, because before that I was very disillusioned with medicine, and even in medical school. In fact, I moved to Boulder in 1963, right after I graduated from medical school. I was in graduate school. I studied philosophy for 3 years before I interned and went into practice because I was having trouble. I knew that I couldn't practice the way I was trained, but I didn't have an alternative. So I just wanted to understand it. And finally, my student deferment ran out, and so I was drafted, and I managed to get a 1Y, which was physically, mentally, or morally unfit for service, except in time of national emergency. That was the most coveted classification of those years, and I was totally lucky to get it. So. Um, So I decided to intern finally, and I interned at St. Anthony's in Denver.
Oh,
And
that's where Nick Nosselman was also working later, right? St. Anthony's, yes.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, oh wow. Well,
Yeah.
I loved it actually. I had a good time there. I had good supervisors and but it was a private hospital and it wasn't a teaching hospital at all. So um, but when I graduated from there, I knew very well that. Oh, and by the way, and what I learned there, first of all, was that the nurses really ran the hospital. And most of what I learned from them. And they had a way of making it seem as if I was giving the orders instead of the other way around. Like like somebody would come in with an allergic reaction to the emergency room, and the head nurse would come up and say, "Well, shall I get the Benadryl, doctor?" "Yeah, that sounds good." "About 50 milligrams?" Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Isn't it
And
still that way? The nurses
yeah,
do
it
run a
is.
lot.
It is a lot, except that I think the nurses aren't willing to do it so much anymore because
So,
they say, "Hey, why should I cotton to these guys or something?" But
so when you were in Colorado, I have to tell everybody, you lived in the like most rustic place one could imagine at that time. And it was a town where the people went that wanted to hide in the mountains.
it was
And
9,200 feet. It was
yeah,
in Ward,
in
outside.
Ward, Colorado, right below the Indian Peaks Wilderness.
Right.
And you did practice there.
I did indeed. I had a telephone, but I didn't have an office and I didn't have a receptionist or anything. So if you could find me, you could have me. But people had to know where I was all the time. And the funny thing was, like I probably 40 births that first winter. Um, and I
And the
never,
winters are tough there,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
There's
yeah.
no heating, people
Right.
have wood, and yeah.
I had an old 48 Plymouth. Um, and driving to town in the middle of the winter, it was quite an adventure sometimes. But um, and whenever I went to town, I would visit whoever was expecting, and so either they would be in labor and I would deliver the baby, or I would do an exam, or I would take a history, or I would just be like a house guest and have a nice meal and a warm bed like one of the family. It was wonderful. Um,
And
so
you mentioned that the the deliveries, the home deliveries were something that really changed your
uh,
life.
oh, absolutely. My first one, it was really a low point in my career because I had just finished my internship and gotten my license and moved back to Boulder and wound up in Ward. Um, but I didn't have homeopathy. I just what I was mainly doing was helping people, guiding them through the medical maze to see that they didn't get hurt too badly. That was the way I saw my role. And I always saw my role as that, even afterwards. But but when people got worse, when their diseases became chronic or they didn't go away, I had nothing really to offer them. I didn't believe in giving drugs for the rest of people's lives. That was something that I refused to do. And I didn't like elective surgery necessarily either, although sometimes it was necessary. Um, so I was really at rock bottom. I couldn't practice in the hospital, so I wasn't getting along with the other doctors in town for the most part. And then this woman who, I just met recently, and she was living in Chautauqua with her husband. And she asked me one day if she was going to have a baby soon, and if I would come to the house and help her. And I thought, wow, I don't know, there's no hospital, no nurses to hand me instruments and make me look good. And you know, but then I sort of, as we talked, I realized she was giving me a present. She was showing me something that I could do as a physician that felt right. I was helping her to do what her body was already doing. And I thought, okay, I will definitely give this a shot. So I get to the house, her labor's, underway, and I thought, well, okay, I have to do a vaginal exam right away the way I was trained. But the husband and the friends are sitting there and they're at rapt attention, and the Bach is playing on the stereo. And I realized, like, she doesn't she's not asking me to do this exam. This is a routine thing. I'm, the best thing I can possibly do is to sit down and pay attention the way everybody else is. So she taught me the whole course that day without saying a word. Um, and by the way, I didn't know how she knew the course, because her first child, who was 9 years old, had been delivered under general anesthesia. And so how did she come up with this? But anyway, she just, this was what she wanted to do. And so it was a beautiful birth. I was very fortunate, and the baby came out right at dawn, and and she put the baby, first of all, he didn't even cry out when he was born. It was like he came out of a favorite hiding place. And they was looking around and curious, and and we were all mesmerized, just looking, and the way people have done since the beginning of time. Um, so it was a revelation to me. It was like a religious experience. Um, at the same time, it never occurred to me for a second that anybody else would have such a crazy idea. Um, and so I I decided to move back to New York just to get a new purchase on medicine, to figure out something new to do. And I started having experiences that showed me that it wasn't going to work for me to practice in New York. I was working at a clinic, and they did make provision for home visits. It was part of President Johnson's war on poverty. So we had this spanking new clinic in Brooklyn Heights, and the patients were poor, mostly Black people from Red Hook, which is way out in the sticks in southern Brooklyn. And we had a fleet of taxis to take them from one end of the social scale to the other. It was kind of ridiculous. But anyway, I get a call one day to see this old guy who's 90 years old, and he's too sick to come into the clinic. So they provided for home visits. So I drove out there to the projects. And as I walked into the room, I had a silvery mustache in those days, a little thin one. And he sees me and he gets up out of bed and salutes me. He thought I was General Pershing, his commanding officer in the First World War. Right? But then, but then he doubles over in pain, and so I go to help him back in bed, and I feel his liver, and it was studded with cancer nodules, um, metastatic, obviously. And so, he was like terminally ill. And I I took his wife aside and I said, look, he's going to die soon. Um, he has bad cancer. We'll get you a housekeeper and do the best we can. And she wouldn't hear of him dying in that little apartment. She wanted him admitted to the hospital. And she was over 80 herself, and she was having health problems, and they didn't have any help or anything. So, and of course, that meant that I had to surrender his care to the interns and residents. I had that was the arrangement of the clinic. So I figured I at least will meet with the house staff and talk to them. So I go in there and I said, look, I know what he has, you know what he has. Let's give him plenty of morphine and let him die in peace. And they looked at me like I'm from the Stone Age. Because of course they wanted, I knew this was why I had gone there in the first place, because they wanted to do a liver biopsy and put him on chemotherapy, knowing perfectly well that the drugs were terrible and were poisonous and were not going to help that much, and that he might get a pneumonia from the biopsy and die a miserable death, which was exactly what happened. So that was like my wake-up call that, practicing in the Big Apple just wasn't going to work for me. So I moved back to Boulder and I wound up in a cabin in Ward. And the word got out that I was willing to do home births, and suddenly people are calling me up and I'm delivering babies hand over fist. And um, it really caught on. And people from all over were calling me. Like, I had a birth in Netherlands. I had to, drive quite a ways no, it wasn't in Netherlands. It was in, oh, it was south. It was way south, um, Central City, maybe.
Oh my, that's far.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
through the
and
mountains.
yeah. So I drove up there, and I passed a little cemetery. Actually, they were burying somebody as I drove up. It seemed somehow suitable that one was going one way and somebody was going the other way. And and the amazing thing was that in the 3.5 years I was in the Boulder area, and most of it in Ward, I never lost a baby. And that's probably about 120 births, something like that. I never lost a baby. I never had to take anybody to the hospital. So if it was a difficult labor, we just waited and waited, and eventually the baby came out.
But then
Um,
how did you get to homeopathy? Did you started using it for
no,
during?
that was when I moved to Santa Fe. I, d-
Oh,
I moved to Santa Fe in 1974, and because I wanted to study acupuncture there. There was a Japanese guy who I had met in New York State. He had a little following there, and he set up a what
oh, the line froze, right? We can't hear you.
oh, you can't hear me
Now
anymore?
we can now we can hear you again.
Okay. The Third Civilization Institute, he called it, and he was wonderful. So I studied with him, and he was an
Now
Aikido,
there's, okay.
he he was an Aikido master, but it was, he saw patients 3 times a week, and there was a lot of ancient religious practice that was going on. It was foreign to me. I admired it and I learned from it, but I realized that this was not going to be a lifetime thing for me, and it had to be because there was a lot of skill involved. You had to feel the pulse in 18 places at at each reading with the patient. Um, three three places on each wrist, three depths on each place. So, and then based on that readout, you would determine where to treat and so on. It was it involved a lot of skill, and it just felt culturally foreign to me. So, but it was energy medicine. What was wonderful about it that prepared me for homeopathy was that you weren't treating the patient as a mind or a body, but as an energy system that was unified. And on the basis of that, you would do your needles or your moxibustion. So it was right around that same time I had moved back to Boulder before I left Colorado, and I studied and followed Hannah Kroger quite a bit.
You did. I worked for her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I loved her.
She
Um,
is an herbalist, German
yeah,
herbalist that came in the 60s
and
and
also a little bit of a homeopath.
a little
You
bit
know,
of a homeopath. And she had
that was
the authorities after her many times, but she always won. Her place is still in Boulder, where you can get
uh-huh.
all kinds of supplements and
Well,
readouts.
I was involved in her defense when they took her to court, and that was something. Um, yeah, a lot of the stuff that she did, I mean, it was like hocus pocus to me. I
Yeah.
didn't understand it at all, but it stimulated me to imagine what the world would be like if it happened to be true. And so, I was very interested in and I saw her do some things that were amazing. Um, I got a call from a patient whose baby I had delivered, and they had been on a trip to show the baby off to her in-laws. They came back and she called me late at night. She was having a pain in her right lower quadrant, and it was pretty severe. So I do an exam, and she had an ovarian cyst that was like the size of an orange, and and I'm getting ready to take her to the hospital, and she said, "Well, please call Hannah first." So I call Hannah, and Hannah says, "Well, what could I possibly do? You are already there."
Yeah, right.
So I said, "Hannah, I think she just wants you to put your hands on her." And so she agrees to come to the house. She puts, she gets on the left side of the patient, puts her left hand on where the mass was, and dangles her right hand by her side. And in about a minute, her body is shaking like mad. And it seemed, I imagined that I saw a current of energy come up from the one hand and out the free hand on the other side. And then she palpated a couple of other points, and she switched sides and came over and put her right hand on where the mass was. And I swear I thought the woman was going to levitate out of the bed. She was screaming and shrieking with pain. She said, "It's okay, just wait a little bit." And after about 15 seconds, it stopped. And she stopped shrieking. And then she did a couple of other points, she said that was a pressure point for the ovaries, she explained to me. So then she got up and left, and I examined her right after that, and the cyst was completely gone, disappeared, and it never came back in the 2 or 3 years that I had contact with her before I left town.
So is that so did you see Hannah giving homeopathic remedies, or how did
Yeah,
you?
yeah, she would douse for remedies, and she would,
Yes, with the
and then
pendulum.
yeah, and then people that she trusted, she would take them into the back room and she would give them supplements or vitamins or herbs or homeopathic remedies, which was the
Mhm.
first time I'd ever seen them given. And I got hold of an old Materia Medica from England. It was by Neatby and Stoneham. I don't know if you know that one, but it was from the 40s or so. And I found it in a used bookstore, and I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. But but I had a patient who was really allergic to bee stings in a bad way. And so I got the name of a homeopath in Vermont that I'd heard of. His name was Alan Sutherland. And I asked him if that would be an appropriate prescription to give her Apis. And he said, "Well, sonny boy, I think you ought to come to our summer school."
Oh, is that how you got to the NCH summer school?
Yeah, 1974.
So the National Center of Homeopathy used to run a summer school that I went to, where you and David Walkington prescribed a remedy for me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, maybe you didn't know, but David asked you for advice. And
Uh-huh.
so the summer school was always like about 2 weeks at Endicott College,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
you were teaching? No, later, right? Yeah.
No, I taught there several years.
And Andre Sain taught there, and David Walkington, and
Yeah,
and of course Julian Winston,
Julian. Yeah, Julian was the head
the
of the school,
the
actually.
and he was the historian of
Yeah.
homeopathy. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
we
Julian was
all the
great.
documentation we have about homeopathic history. He and you edited his. Didn't he make that VHS tape on
Yeah.
homeopathic
Oh,
history?
yeah, it's wonderful.
Yes, and the book.
It became a book too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still have that book. It's wonderful. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
so that's how you then studied at the summer school.
yeah, and do you remember, did you ever know what was his name? Oh, Otto Gutentag.
Oh no, that's a very German name. Guten
Yeah,
Tag means good day.
yeah, he
Yeah.
was a
No, I
professor.
don't know him.
He was a professor at UC San Francisco, and he had been a homeopath in his youth. But he was teaching like medical philosophy or something. And he was he said the very first words of that seminar to me. He said, "The savage believes that everything is alive."
The Savage?
The savage. Um, the physicist believes that nothing is alive.
Wow.
The physician must discriminate between the living and the non-living. I thought
Wow,
that was
that's something.
I thought that was great, but
That is great.
I don't remember anything else that he said. But Harris Coulter was the first speaker that I really liked, and he wasn't a practitioner; he was a historian, but he was very well informed. And
And
anyway,
didn't Harris Coulter write that book, A Shot in the Dark,
yes,
about vaccination, an early
yes,
book on vaccination?
yes, with
Yeah.
Barbara Lowe Fisher,
Yes.
who is the head of the Vaccine Information Network, or I forget the name of it. Um,
You
anyway,
know, I must tell you that when the the fright and anxiety of the COVID took, when I, succumbed to that,
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
pulled out your book on vaccination, and I pulled out Ruth Shepard on
Uh-huh.
epidemics,
Yeah.
and I kept
Yeah.
reading it every night. And
Yeah.
it was like, it's not so bad. It's going to be
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. 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 So did you get the shot after? Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. Good for you.
Two times I had it, but
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
just
figured
had,
then you get immune
yeah,
eventually.
that's the way you get immune. Exactly. I
I'm
ha-
sure
I
I'm
just had it. I just had it about a month ago, actually, for
you
the
did.
for the first time. Yeah.
You retired in 2020, right
Right.
before COVID happened, right?
It was right in the middle of it. It was just starting to really get established. And I had already decided the year before that I was going to retire at that time. And suddenly it happened all by itself. I didn't have to do anything because people weren't coming to see me because it was, they had to stay in their house. And so, yeah, it was very easy for me to retire. But I actually wrote a long piece on the COVID, but I haven't been able to publish it anywhere.
It's hard, huh?
I posted it on the Age of Autism site, and I actually posted it on RFK Jr.'s site too.
Can you
Um,
repeat that? Age of Autism
yeah,
and the other one?
children'shealthdefense.org.
I think these are good places for us to know, right? And
Yeah.
anybody, if you want to unmute your mic and have questions at some time. So here, Children's Defense,
Uh, children'shealthdefense.org.
Health Defense. I didn't even know this site. Okay, that'll be good to get to. Yeah, because we need to defend those children.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so, but
So you retired, and then COVID kind of
yeah, and
broke loose some.
the first thing I did was I started to write the book that my latest book, which just came out earlier this past year. Um, Although it's because it's published in India and it hasn't yet made it onto Amazon, and it's hard to get at the moment. Um,
Yes, I mean, I think Dana Ullman posted that the first print was sold out,
well,
and
yeah,
now the second printing is coming from India or something.
hopefully, yes, but it hasn't come yet. So anyway, I assume that'll be happening soon. But so yeah, where were we?
Yeah, where were we? We were at we kind of got into the vaccination idea
Oh yeah,
somewhat about COVID and the children's defense, where
yeah.
you,
I didn't put the COVID piece into the new book because the new book is really looking back on my practice, and the COVID is looking forward because it's still going on, and so it just didn't fit into the book. But it's really it illustrates many of the same ideas. Um, yeah,
vaccination has always been such an issue. And even, teaching homeopathy, it was sometimes you didn't want to say anything about it,
right, right. And
because it's such a powerful industry that's behind it.
well, and it was interesting because a lot of my writings have been about philosophy, about just, medicine as a way of life and what's good and what's bad and so on. But vaccination interested me from the beginning because it was because of the science. That was the one scientific thing that really got me because I sensed that the science that was being put out for it isn't real science, and
Uh-huh.
so um, I I never really I had this gut feeling back in Colorado that I didn't want to vaccinate people, at least especially for the diseases that were um, you know on already on the decline or weren't that serious, and especially because the kids shouldn't be penalized to not be able to go to school if they didn't go along. And in in Santa Fe, that wasn't so much of a problem because um, it was really back then. It was mainly the DPT and the MMR and the polio. Those were the main requirements. And so if people said no, um, nobody really bothered them too much. Um, but and in Boston, likewise, in Boston, uh, they had a religious exemption, so that
Mhm.
and you didn't that meant you didn't have to belong to some fundamentalist church or Christian Science or anything. You just had to say, I don't believe in this. You didn't have to give a reason. Um, and the medical exemptions were very hard to get and were designed to be hard to get. So um, many of my patients didn't vaccinate, but also many did. I didn't tell people not to vaccinate. I didn't give them myself. So they had to go elsewhere to get them. Um, I didn't even give them when they wanted me to. Um,
Right.
so because I just had this gut feeling, and then one of the things that I did when I moved to Boston was I took a year off to just study, and that was one of the main things that I was wanting to study. Um, Actually, it turned out it was less than a year because after I moved to Boston, and I hadn't told anybody that I was coming. I mean, it had been years and years since I'd been in Boston in college, and but my uh, my partner and I moved to Boston, and within a couple of weeks, after not telling anybody that I was going to be there, I got a call from this old woman asking if I was the homeopathic doctor that she'd heard about, and 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 so before I knew it, she's in my living room grilling me about Hahnemann and Kent and to see if I was really a homeopath, and and um, and and insisting that I open up a practice immediately. So then her friends started showing up. Most of them were quite old also, and they were bringing me gifts of old remedies from the 19th century and books and journals and all sorts of things. And it was very hard for me to tell them that I was taking a year off to study. I was even seeing them in my living room before I had a license even. So
But then after you did study then, I mean, also formally, right? Like at with the National Center, right? With the
yeah,
legendary Millersville course, right?
I took the National Center course for two years in a row,
In the
74
70s, early
and
70s.
75, and then I went to Greece
And
in 76 and studied with Vithoulkas. Actually, I went to the Liga meeting, the Congress, which was in Athens at that time.
so Liga, can you explain that for the people that don't know Liga?
Yeah, Liga is a group of homeopathic physicians from all over the world. It's called the Liga Medicorum Homeo Liga Internationalis. No, well,
Something
anyway,
that.
It's the International League of Homeopathic Physicians, and
Mm-hmm.
and they meet all over the world. They have one big conference every year in some place in the world, and and
Haven't then they opened that up also for other people to participate, not just physicians?
I don't think so.
No.
The American Institute has done that.
Oh, the American Institute of
Yeah,
Homeopathy,
the
right? They have
AIH
done that.
has done that. They've finally admitted naturopaths and nurse practitioners and nurses. Um, so and they're more hospitable. The AIH, when I joined it, was very uppity about doctors only, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but they've mellowed out since then.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the MDs really aren't keeping it up. They're the when I started, there were a group of other MDs who were joining also, like Dave Wember, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
Sandra Chase or Nick Nossaman. Um, and we've all grown old and are dying or retiring or something. And the new ones aren't taking our places so much, but the naturopaths are. And so
Mm-hmm.
they are really taking over the AIH at this point, which is good. I think it's healthy, but it's a shame that the MDs aren't grabbing it now so much.
Yeah.
So this is an important thing.
So
And
you went to Greece like a few times, right? And studied
yes,
with Vithoulkas?
yes,
Yes.
yeah, I went back there another time. Yeah, it's funny, his methodology, I mean, he doesn't have a definite methodology that really grabbed me so much. What inspired me was just his knowledge and his ability to see people of every kind. And he just had a level of understanding that was very deep. And so I felt that, I can continue, I can study, I can learn, I can learn how to do this. Not maybe not as well as he can, but enough to sustain me in a practice. And he really inspired a whole generation, that really my generation, like Bill Gray also, and
Bill
Roger.
Gray and Roger Morrison
Yeah, yeah,
and Nancy and
yeah,
Herrick and
exactly.
yes. So then later on you did do more work or oh you also studied with Rajan, right, in India?
Oh
Rajan
yes,
Sankaran?
yes. That was in 1970, no,
No,
1996. I went
yeah.
I went to Mumbai and spent a month with him and his school, and that was a great experience. He actually came to California, and well, he came to Boston too at one point. um, but
And he did, yeah, he came to Esalen, I think.
that was the greatest seminar I've ever taken
Oh
in my
boy,
life.
I wish I could have been there.
He was discovering it on the spur of the moment, because he just it was really the David Warkentin's software that enabled him to go through the literature and pick out the commonalities between members of a family and homeopathic plants, and see what was the common features of the family and what was the common features of the kingdom, of the plant kingdom. And it was just mind-boggling. And each day he would come to the seminar with a whole new revelation that had come to him during the night. He was doing his homework while he was there, so it was
Hmm.
it was very exciting. Um,
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, David Walkentin started McRepertory. He was
yes,
the creator of McRepertory, which then later on now is called Synthesis. And I think Rajan Sankaran owns that company now.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So, yes, David Walkington used to come to every seminar all over the world and always do the repertorization for the cases that were presented.
Yeah, he was wonderful.
Yeah, he taught for our school too, several times. And he supported me greatly on getting everything started. Yes.
Oh, I'm glad to know
He taught me make repertory above ward in Indian Peaks Wilderness.
Oh, wow.
On a picnic table. That was the best classroom you could ever have.
I used to take my dog up there all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was great.
I still go, to that area. So yeah, so you did a lot of trainings yourself, and then you also you have a degree from Harvard, I believe, right?
Well, that's my undergraduate degree.
I see.
Yeah.
Yes. And then you did, you were the president of the NCH, where you originally started at the summer school.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
I was after that. No, I remember we had our annual meeting in Boston in '86, and we invited Tatiana Popova from Ukraine. She was the head of a school there that had been started by her father, and Harris Coulter was the translator for her at that meeting, because he used to work for the UN as a Russian translator. That was how he met Katya.
So for everybody, what did you just say? Because that's one of the famous early books in homeopathy. Harris Coulter wrote on the vaccinations, right?
But he also wrote a history of medicine that included homeopathy.
Right.
It's called Divided Legacy.
That's right. Yes, I still have that book.
Several volumes, well worth reading. And he describes a dichotomy in medicine, that Hippocratic medicine includes both sides of that dichotomy. What he called empirical, which is based on experience, and what he called rational, which is based on theory. And he felt that most of medicine was of the rational type since Hippocrates, but Hippocrates was both, and homeopathy was on the empirical side, the provings, the devoting so much attention to how medicines actually acted in healthy people, and then translating it into the sick. So it was quite an interesting thesis that he had. He wrote a wonderful book about the double-blind experiment, and forget the name of that. But
I can't remember either. But it's kind of come back quite a bit, even like on NPR, on the radio, they talk about placebo, and how actually Western medicine also uses the placebo effect. And and you wrote an article on that, right? You wrote on the placebo effect. I saw it listed on this heritage site. And the homeopathic remedies versus the placebo effect.
Oh, yes.
And where can one read that? It says homeotherapy.
Yeah, that was an old journal that was published in the 70s and early 80s.
I have a huge stack of old journals. I should go look.
I can send you the article, but it was basically a bunch of cases, really. I mean, it's something you already know. I don't think it's going to be anything new to you. Um, it's just utilizing that as a teaching tool.
But if you think about it, you wrote that sometime in the late 70s or something, and
In the
now they're
early 80s.
talking about this. It's like 30 years later, right, or
Yeah,
more.
yeah,
You know, the science and the public understanding is trying to catch up to this placebo effect because
yeah.
it's quite useful.
I think the new book discusses it at some length because there's a whole section on the medical system. I mean, basically, the book is the first part of the book is a memoir of my early years, my medical school, my internship, and early years in practice. But the most of the book then is three sort of treatises on different subjects that engage me because of all the problems I was having with being a doctor. So the first one is about homeopathy, of course. It's just a little treatise on the homeopathic idea, um, which will I'm sure you already are totally familiar with everything in that. But the second part is on the medical system, and it's like a philosophical critique of the medical system per se. And the third part is on vaccination, on the science of that. And then there's a final chapter that sort of ties it all together. So there's a lot about the placebo effect in that, um, in both the homeopathy section and the medical system section, because it's just a basic concept. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, I can send you that old article if you want, but it's nothing. It will be nothing new to you. Let's put it that way. Um,
I have a question.
yeah.
Yes.
I can interrupt. I'm intrigued by the title of your book, Conscientious Objector.
Uh-huh.
So could you expand a little bit more? I mean, you've talked about like the homeopathy and the vaccines and placebo and the medical system. Could you just kind of expand, hone in on that conscientious objector part of your thinking? And that was the title of your book.
Yeah. Well, first of all, um, you have to realize that my medical career um, was it started developing at the same time as the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was a big event for me because before that time, I had thought, America is great and everything we do is just fine. And so, you know, uh, I didn't have a problem with what our soldiers were. I mean, I grew up during World War II, and I thought World War II was triumphant for our way of life, which indeed it was. Um, but the Vietnam War, um, first of all, it showed me that the imagery of medicine is military. It's based on combat. That that diseases are enemies to be fought, and somehow I realized because I was very anti-war in the Vietnam era. I was a member of SDS. I demonstrated against the war. I did time in prison because of that. And so that was a big thing. But it also showed me that the medical part of it was wrong in a certain sense. That my time studying philosophy, for example, I went to graduate school before I interned and went into practice, and I began to realize that our sicknesses are precisely our self-healing attempt, however incomplete or unsuccessful it may be. So that making war on it is making war on ourselves. and it sobered me up quite a bit. And I, without realizing it, had troubled me throughout my medical school. So it was like a wake-up call for me. So that was the beginning of it. And I was a conscientious objector even when I graduated from medical school because I didn't want to go into practice. I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't bring myself to practice the way I was trained. And the book goes into that at some length. And there's also an essay, a lot of it comes from an essay called Why I Became a Homeopath, which I wrote back in the 90s. And that was published in the Journal of the American Institute. Um, but so that was the conscientious objector part. And that led to my experience doing the first home birth as I described. And that led in turn to my studies of acupuncture and energy medicine. And that led directly to homeopathy, which I got into at precisely that moment that I was already studying acupuncture. I was being prepared for that way of looking at things. So
Yeah, it sounds like you're following in the footsteps of Hahnemann. I hadn't
well,
thought of it that way before, but he was a conscientious objector. He
yes, he
put in
was.
practice.
He
Yeah.
was, yes. Yeah, he dropped out of medicine also for
Mhm.
quite a while. He was totally disgusted, and he would have been even more disgusted if he had seen what happened, say, after to medicine after the Civil War when it developed this very powerful methodology at that time. So, um, and yeah, my critique of medicine is precisely that it's too powerful, that it encourages us to do things that are brilliant in the moment, but that we lose sight of the whole picture so that we ignore the collateral damage of of that kind of power being deployed at that one strategic point and ignoring the rest of the body, ignoring what is going on elsewhere. And that has perverted our science really to a great extent. And of course, vaccination is the one example I keep referring to, but it's general throughout the system, really. So, and at the same time, there are things about medicine that are quite splendid. So that's the other part that has to be put into the equation, and I describe that too because there were plenty of times when I was um, practicing homeopathy in Santa Fe and delivering babies at the same time when the medical system really saved the patient's life and really saved me from a dreadful complication that could have that was threatening my career as well. So um, so that was the other side of my conscientious objection, is that I was also filled with wonder for what medicine has accomplished. So homeopathy gave me a way of re-entering the medical profession in a way.
Yeah, the whole idea of the warfare, it is such a part of our current medical system, the war on cancer, just we talk about fighting and beating and all these things.
Well, and there's anti antibiotics and
Right.
anti-metabolites and antihypertensives and so on.
Antidepressants.
Yeah, all of that.
It's all
So,
anti,
yeah. So
right?
so that was my conscientious objection, and homeopathy was let's put it this way. I knew immediately when I stepped into that seminar in 1974, this is for me. It spoke to me immediately because of that background, because of that anti. Um, so it
Because
was,
homeopathy is pro,
yeah,
right?
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And what made it really clear to me, what cheered me up about it immediately, was that it was all done in the language of the patient. It was like the language of the physician, the language of abnormalities. That's all fine, but somehow it entices us into forgetting the language of the patient. The language of the patient is what is most important. That's where we're headed. That's where we need to do what we do. Um, so so the fact that the whole process, the interview, the selection of the remedy, the follow-up, the whole business is conducted in the language of the patient. And for me, that was liberating.
Yes. So I was wondering if there are any more questions. Otherwise, I'd like to read a comment on the book, and because it's really lovely. I don't know, Richard, if you have heard this one. Anyone have any more questions? No, okay, I'll read this one, if that's okay. What is remarkable about Dr. Moskowitz is his compassion and sensitivity to others' needs. His book is full of stories ranging from tragic to comic, and of moral choices like prolonging life or letting people die with dignity. There are beautiful stories of his first home birth and the healing power of homeopathic medicines, which he used for decades. And there's the plea for science that can see and make use of what randomized controlled trials overlook. This was by Dr. Bernardo Marizaldi. He's a professor at the Thomas Jefferson University and the vice president of the International League of Homeopathic Physicians.
He was also the president of the AIH for a while.
Ah, yeah.
Mm.
There are many comments. These were on Dana Ullman's website, Homeopathic Educational Services. Also, if you go to the Heritage site, you can find a lot of information there, but we all hope that we can get our hands on this book soon.
Yeah, it'll be. I think I've just bought a bunch of them from India myself, and so I'm going to have them sent to Dana. So they should be available within a couple of weeks, I would think.
So can they be bought directly at Jane if we order directly?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Go to Jane Publisher website. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also available in Amazon Canada, and
Mm.
and there are two dealers in the Netherlands that have it. One is called Emrys,
Oh, Emrys, yes. I visited them in Holland. They're in Holland.
and the other one I can't pronounce it. It's something like Bookhandel or something. Merlijn Bookhandel.
I don't know them.
And then and in the UK it's available also through the Homeopathic Book Company, it's called. I think it's just homeopathicbookcompany.com or something like that.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And
it was lovely to see you again.
yeah, it's been a long time.
Actually, yeah, it's been a very long time. So
I do have a question.
Yes.
Sorry, just found my video. Thank you very much. This has been very, very interesting. But I guess I would just like to ask you, where do you see the future of homeopathy going? And if less, and I know that you mentioned naturopaths are the ones taking it forward in that as opposed to doctors, but how do you see that change evolving, and where do you see us going as homeopaths?
I'm very encouraged, actually, even though the MDs are not really getting it right now. But the medical system is basically broken, that people are realizing that it's not fulfilling their needs on many different fronts. And that has, you know, nothing intrinsically to do with homeopathy in the sense that, I mean, it's just where people are at. At the same time, they're not grabbing homeopathy yet. Um, some are, of course, but and I think the COVID was a big factor in making that even worse, making it really uh, come to a head, and to the extent that people aren't buying, staying with the boosters and so forth, and it's just, and they're just treating it like a normal flu, basically. Um,
You,
so my feeling is that it's going to fall apart. That,
the medicine, you mean?
yeah, I really I think it's could happen at any time. It's hard to say why that happens or how that happens, but I think that preparation is being laid, and I think there's going to be a terrible uh, backlash about that. So people are going to see that homeopathy works, that it's been working for 200 years, and it's still working. It's working better in a way that it ever has, because it's never been uh, universally accepted. Quite the contrary. I mean, it's true. It's better in Europe than it is here. It's better in India than it is anywhere. But even so, it's still controversial. It's still on the outskirts in a way. But I think that's going to change. I just feel that is ready to explode. And so I feel very optimistic about it. I feel that um, no matter what happens in the short run, that knowledge is there. And and you know, in a way, my life proves it, because I had dropped out of medicine, and then I tentatively found my way back, and then suddenly here is a way that I've been able to sustain a general practice of medicine for 46 years, doing nothing but homeopathy. And I'm not the only one. There are dozens and dozens of American doctors who have had the same experience. So that tells me that this is a viable alternative, and people are going to grab it. So
Yeah, wouldn't you agree? Like during COVID, there were thousands of people gathering on Zoom about homeopathy, you know, big conferences, and homeopathic remedies were sold out. You couldn't get anything at the time. Prices went up. And so there's a real demand for this kind of system.
I'll even go further. I'll say that it could save the medical system.
Mm.
I don't know that it will. I don't know, you know, that's where it's going to be curious how it pans out, whether it's part of the medical profession or it's some complete alternative. I hope it's the former. I hope that we'll be able to salvage what's good about the medical system and that homeopathy can help that. But it might not. I don't know. That's very much open to question. But and that's where I think the doctors, the MDs, can play an important role, even though there are few of us. So yes, I feel very optimistic about it. But there's probably going to be some unpleasantness in the meantime. I mean, there definitely is going to be, because the system is broken. It's not curing. It's palliating, and it's aggravating, and it's ignoring, and so it's in trouble, definitely, and we're in trouble. So,
Angela, you had a question?
Well, I just wanted to add to that. I feel very encouraged with the future of homeopathy. I think all of us learning now are in a really good, we're in a really good time. I see there's going to be a need for it because I feel like you said the health industry is broken, and it's going to get worse with all the surge of immigrants and all the free healthcare. And where I'm at, we already see a lot of doctors trying to go concierge, like they're dropping out of the healthcare system in itself. And I see in the long run a lack of doctors, medical doctors, and then this huge surplus of the population needing this healthcare. That's the needs aren't going to be met. And then with antibiotics becoming resistant, so many viruses becoming resistant to antibiotics or bacteria, whatever. I think that we're in a really good place to be learning homeopathy, because I feel there's going to be a very big demand at some point. It's just a matter of when.
Yes. And this is not true to America only.
right.
I know Germany, who has this legendary healthcare system. Well, believe me, it doesn't have that anymore.
Mm.
It's very difficult to get care. And then when you get care, and like you said, Richard, it's not curative. And medicine never had that claim, right, to be curative.
Well, certainly not of the chronic diseases. Um, and that's, the rise of the chronic diseases has been the major medical fact of the last 40, 50 years. That the statistics are quite alarming, really. That, when I was growing up, when I was a child, and everybody got the measles, and everybody got the mumps and the chicken pox and everything. The chronic diseases were relatively uncommon, and now they are so common that a large majority of US adults have at least one chronic disease, and many times more than that. And so this is a huge epidemiological phenomenon that every doctor is dealing with all the time. And we don't seem to be interested in where that's coming from, why that's happening. And I think that is known on an instinctive level, but we're deciding not to investigate it very much because we're afraid of what we're going to find, and it's going to be a big hassle to undo that, because to undo that is going to mean reining in the chemical industry in a big way. It's going to mean the end of fossil fuels. It's going to mean all sorts of things. So, there's an interest in just keeping the lid on that, but that's changing. People are suffering because of it, and they're starting to know it, and they're starting to demand a more, thorough approach to it. So all the elements are in place for that to blow up, but it's at the moment the lid is still being kept on somehow, but less and less.
Yeah.
So
So thank you again.
oh,
And
you're
then
welcome.
also you publish interesting things on your Facebook page. So I don't know how, if you want to request to be a friend, and and then you can read a lot of these issues that Dr.
Yeah,
Moskowitz has been addressing.
yeah, I'm very much involved in that now. Just I'm really uh, paying a lot of attention to the election and to the war and just the state of the world, as well as the vaccine issue and medical things in general. So yeah, and I mean, I'm not practicing, so I have lots of time to think about all that, and still writing occasionally. So
So researching and writing.
yeah,
Oh,
I just wrote a little. I won't call it a novel. It's too short. It's about 75 pages, but it's about Moses, and it's fiction.
I'd like to read that.
It's yeah, I haven't published it yet. Um, yeah, he was a tragic figure in my mind. I when I look at what's happening in Gaza now, I see I see the results of what he accomplished and what he uh, you know, just the tragedy of that.
He said in play in action, right? Way back.
Yes, yes. He
Yeah.
he he said he said, you know, take over this land. Don't have anything to do with these other people who are already there. Um, and what was tragic was that it was a complete turnover in his own life. That he had married someone who was not of his faith. That he felt comfortable with these people and lived with them happily. But then he took it upon himself because they begged him to do this mission to take them out of Egypt. And
Mm-hmm.
so he became a different person in a way. And of course, his marriage was kaput because of that.
Let's go.
And so, you know, it was on his deathbed when he realized that he didn't want to go to settle the promised land. Um, it wasn't because God told him not to. It was because I think he realized that he had made a mistake, that he had gone too far. He had um, so so he decided to give it to Joshua and let them do it. And he died in overlooking. He could see Jericho, but he didn't go there.
He never touched that land. He could only see it. Yes. Yes.
The
Well, on
narrator,
that, yeah.
the narrator of the book is the scribe who was working in Pharaoh's palace in Egypt when Moses was born, and he became his friend and his foster father, and so he went along on the journey on the Exodus with him, and he would argue with him all the time when he would make these extreme statements and say, you know, can't you just mellow out a little bit? Can't you just, you know, make peace with these people? Um, and so it's like they have a dialogue that that goes throughout. And so anyway,
I'd like to read that.
yeah, I can send it to you.
Let me know. Yeah, yeah. Well, again, thank you, and this was really great and so full of information, and I'm looking forward to reading this last book soon.
Okay, great.
Shall we say goodbye for now?
Yeah, that sounds good. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Be well.
Yes, be well.
Thank you.